Oh, hi guys, and welcome to episode 8 of the Welsh B Show. And joining me tonight is sports broadcaster and commentator Bryn Law, and we're going to talk about what else? Wrexham AFC and this massive success story, this fairy tale that's continuing to happen for the town. Bryn, thank you for joining me.
You're welcome.
I mean, as a Wrexham fan, you must be buzzing. How has this happened? What's happening?
Still trying to work it out, to be honest with you. It's been a few years now, hasn't it? What's happened? What's happening? Well, an incredible thing has happened. I've been at university this afternoon, which is where I do some of my work these days, and they let me work in the sports marketing field, despite the fact that nobody seems to have cottoned on to the fact that I don't know an awful lot about it. But we were talking about, whenever I talk about sports marketing, I always end up talking about, as the students will yawn and tell you, I always end up telling them about Welcome to Wrexham and imploring them to sit down and watch Welcome to Wrexham if they are serious about sports marketing, because it is one of the most incredible sports marketing stories ever. And if you look at where the club is now compared with only a couple of years ago, where the club was then, on the pitch, yeah, that one's straightforward. National League side then, but League One side pushing for Championship side now. But if you look in other aspects and other areas, the transformation has been no less dramatic. In some senses, has been even more dramatic. So attendance levels have risen, to an average gate, which this year is knocking around somewhere around the 12,000 mark. Most games are selling out. And then you've got all the other elements that have come in. You've had club record transfer fee by an absolute mile, but you've got the talk of the new stand. The design of that, I think, is absolutely amazing. That looks like it will be a real sort of standout statement kind of piece of football architecture. And then you've got, all the kind of the appointments around the club. The people who work there now have come from huge football clubs and huge sports roles elsewhere, and they've come to work at little old Wrexham. So all across the board, every element that you see there is just the way that this has happened is something that every sports marketer, for instance, should be studying hard to try and replicate and then impose it upon their own sport or their own club, because some incredible things have been done here. And I'm not quite sure they are, because I am still trying to genuinely work it out.
It's not stopping, is it, at the moment? But
there's no sign of it stopping, and there's no sign of. I mean, a lot of people have said that the guys will lose interest, but I've actually spoken to them about this concept. In fact, you don't have to ask them about it; they'll tell you. They'll say, we are in this for the long haul. That this is just the start of a process. Which will involve not only the football club but the community. It's already impacting the community, because as anyone from Wrexham will tell you, the place, it's not been transformed, right? We haven't gone from Wrexham to Venice or Florence or whatever overnight. That hasn't happened. But there are real signs on the ground in the city centre, stroke town centre. There are loads of places to go and eat and drink in Wrexham now. There's a really good variety of places, and more are opening all the time. So there's a bit of a rejuvenation going on in terms of what happened in the centre of Wrexham. The community's been lifted. You already had really good creative things going on in Wrexham even prior to the takeover. So Focus Wales, rather, I think is a fantastic. It's my arguably my favourite music event. Those guys have done great work in putting that in Wrexham. So that was already there, but now you've got the museum not too far from opening, the football museum, which will be a great asset in terms of the tourism. You've got tourism, by the way, which is another mini miracle in itself. So there's all sorts of other things that you can look at and focus on away from the football, which just give you a sense of a really fantastic thing happening, and the input that the two guys have had has been absolutely crucial in all of that. The drive that they have, the energy and all the rest of it, the vision, has been fundamental to all this stuff happening.
Well, I think that's the key factor, is it, that with the documentary and what they've tried to do is bring the community and the football together. It wasn't about just the football. And as you say, there's so much around Wrexham. We're in a very privileged position here in terms of the scenery, the locations we have, the history. Earthig Hall. I mean, I live in Rostotland, Bircham Colliery's there. There's Gretford. I mean, it's a tragedy, but there's history. celebrating and recognising history. They've brought that together.
That's right, and that's been a very, very important element of what's happened here. The guys love the history bit, so they would very much have kind of invested in the idea of hearing the stories and then retelling the stories. And on that basis, actually, I think we've got quite a long way to go, because I don't think we've started really to tell a lot of the historical stories around, like the sites that you've mentioned there, that the Wrexham's part of the Industrial Revolution, prior to the Industrial Revolution, all the things that have been going on around the town for hundreds and hundreds of years beyond the football, which kind of, I think we can do more as a town, as a city, to develop all of that. That's kind of early days in the sense of that all happening. But if you've got people coming to visit, it's you're duty bound to try and provide them with things to go and look at. And I think we could do a bit more work on that basis in Wrexham. But you can see that people are spotting this, and that they are beginning that process of creating an experience around what we probably overlooked, which was the strength of the place, which was the story around the place and all the different things that have happened there. But as you also rightly mentioned, right on the edge of some of the most beautiful scenery that you'll visit in the world. So I go and visit my mum regularly in Llangollen, and every time I drive into Llangollen, it's like it lifts your heart, because you get that view of the river and the Dinas Bran, and then you see the railway station and all the rest of it. And it's a great place to go and visit, and then that in itself is the gateway to something incredibly spectacular when you go up towards Snowdonia and stuff as well. So we've neglected our own strengths, I think, for a long time. It's taken somebody to come in from outside to look at this and go, wow, you've got something really good here. Let's make more of it. And so finally, probably we've got around to doing that.
What was your initial thoughts when you heard Ryan Reynolds, a Hollywood actor, was interested in buying Wrexham? Were you wary? Were you concerned?
No, I was never wary. I might have been skeptical initially that it was actually true. But once it clearly was true, I was excited, because there are factors in this takeover that make it different from other takeovers, in that the people taking over have already got really big reputations. So in many instances that I've seen in football and dealing with football, been around the football industry, when people take over football clubs, I have to say quite often there are very wealthy people who take over football clubs, who at the point at which they take over a football club are hugely successful from their business background, but nobody knows who they are, because they've made a load of money, but they've just worked in business, kind of. And then you come into football, and then all of a sudden, as the owner of a football club, everybody knows who you are, because that's the way it works these days. And that isn't always a great thing. That can bring problems in terms of the way that whether the ego then grows to an extent where it causes problems for the people in charge of the football club or the manager and all the rest of it. It can be a complicated situation. So in this instance, the one thing you didn't have was people who felt the need to tell people, look at me, look who I am. They didn't need that, because they've already got that in buckets. And the other thing they obviously did have as well was access to wealth. And you could see why they had access to wealth, because of the jobs they do. In other instances with ownership, sometimes the source of that wealth can be a little kind of misty. And you have people coming in who tell you they're extremely wealthy and very successful business people, but it's sometimes a little difficult to ascertain just how it is that they got themselves to that position. So there was no mystery on that, in that sense here, and I had no concern that they were coming in to to make themselves famous. They didn't need it for either of those purposes. They definitely weren't coming in to make any money either. I think they said that quite early on, which is also a very healthy position to come in from, because it's fact. You're not going to do it. Very rarely do you do it. So those things gave me some sort of sense of calm about the prospects of what would happen. Maybe the concern, the worry would be that they would kind of get it spectacularly wrong. They would try and do things maybe work in the ways that they'd worked previously to get things done, and then it just wouldn't happen, because very often I've seen people come into football and they try and impose the same things, the same rules and the same tactics that they've employed successfully in business with a football club. And actually, football isn't really an industry. It calls itself an industry, but it's still far from it in many, many senses in terms of the way it's run. So there are elements of it which feel like industry, and there are other bits that really don't. And so it can be quite confusing for those who've been successful in business to try and impose those rules upon an industry that isn't really kind of up for taking them. But again, in this instance, I think an important, really important part of the process was that right from the word go, in fact, prior to the word go, they had people on the ground who they brought in to do the job of running a football club. So people who had previously worked in football. And so the other important bit then was, having identified those people, was that they would talk to those people and they would ask them, what should we do? And when they were told, given advice, they've listened to the advice. Now, all those things sound obvious, but I'm pretty sure they don't always happen.
Well, I think that's right, because I think they knew what they didn't know, and they knew what they were good at and what they are good at. And like I said, the people they brought in, from even Fleur Robinson, Sean Harvey, even Michael Williamson now, they've hired a lot of very experienced people. They knew their asset was their name, their performance skills, and they knew. What also is important, I think, is that the documentary was there from the beginning. They knew there was going to be a vehicle to market the story. I think that's how it started out I think it started out as a project for them, and it's taken on a much bigger role in their lives. They didn't expect to find out what
I'm not sure. I'd be interested to know how kind of pivotal to the whole thing the documentary bit was. My suspicion with that is that it's not a happy coincidence. Of course it isn't. They would have thought about, what can we do with this to tell this story. But I think it happens without the documentary. Maybe in terms of exposure, the key bit that wouldn't happen without the documentary is the incredible support the club now enjoys around the world, but in particular in North America, which I saw myself last summer when I went over there. But I think it's been very, very. I mean, it's been brilliant for that. The market that's the marketing genius has turned out to be Welcome to Wrexham. But they were. I don't think they've invested this because they could make a documentary out of it. Is what I'm trying to say. I think they've invested in this because it is a project. You're right. They wanted to get involved in sport. They'd had conversations between themselves about why and how they should do this, and then they went out and found the club, and we were the lucky guys. But it's the project that's key, and the documentary helps the project.
And obviously, success from the beginning really has helped that. It's helped create the storylines, back-to-back promotions.
And that's it. And I was in on the day they took over, Rob and Ryan. One of the first kind of decisions that they gave the green light to, or their people gave the green light to, was the decision to improve the match streaming, the match day coverage of the club, which was it was all in lockdown, of course, that when it was the takeover was confirmed. So I was the guy who'd put the pitch in, the proposal in to do that. And so we got the nod on the Thursday or whatever it was, and did the Woking game the following Tuesday. And that was a little indicator, I think, straight away. I mean, I think that was quite significant in itself, because that was the quickest way they could prove to the fans that things were going to be different, was actually by ensuring that the product they saw when they paid their £10 for the match subscription, that suddenly dramatically, changed, frankly, beyond recognition from what it had been to where it was. And so that was all down to them agreeing basically to pay for that level of improved coverage. So it was a decision they took very early on that put a clear marker down to say things are going to be different now. We are willing to invest in improving, and so they invested in improving that coverage first, and then at the same time other things were beginning to happen behind the scenes. So we did that period through to the end of that particular season, when if it didn't work out as it was meant to at the end of that particular season. So there was a kind of a little bit of a bump along the way, a couple of bumps along the way, because the same thing happened the following year. But there was still, there was still enough in what was happening there to keep everybody excited. We were all seeing, we were seeing better players come in. We were seeing a team that was now competing at the top, which prior to the early finish of the lockdown season looked like it might get relegated. So there was a turnaround in fortunes there. And big managerial appointment, a guy who came in with a fantastic CV and a great track record at sort of a little higher than that level. But you could see that this was a guy who knew his stuff. So incrementally, there were improvements being made there on and off the pitch, even from those very, very early days, and that kept everybody engaged and excited. And then we've seen, where we've ended up now,
which is sort of a million miles away, million years away from the days of Alex Hamilton. What can you remember about those days? You were in the thick of that issue, in the storm, in the protests. I remember filming you on a camcorder making a speech on Library Fields. I have it on my channel somewhere.
That's right.
So what do you remember about Hamilton and his time at the club?
Well, it was a really, really strange time. I mean, it was strange at the time because I, at one point, was getting calls from Mark Gutterman, because obviously I was working in Sky in those days, so I had kind of a high-profile position. And I was getting calls from Mark Gutterman offering me a place on the board and stuff like that. And I mean, in hindsight, you realise that there was an attempt being made there to curry favour with the fan base to an extent by bringing in a useful idiot, which would have been me, to kind of somebody that they could, hide behind and say, well, he's involved in the decision-making process. Anyway, luckily, it was never going to happen because I had two beans to rub together anyway. So it was not a thing that I was ever going to take them up on. But they were having conversations like that behind the scenes, and then I was able to persuade Sky Sports News to start covering the story. So I did quite a bit. I was at the cup game in London at Hayes when the coffin got carried through the streets, and we did a piece around that. And then the Beer a Week launch, I did some coverage. I came over to do coverage of that, and so I was able to use my job to try and keep the story in one area of the kind of in the media. So I was having that involvement. At the same time, I was talking to the people who were kind of organising the big protests, because I mean the campaign at that stage was incredible, really, because you had the kind of the diplomatic arm, which was the people who were negotiating, the people who were kind of the trust board guys who were in there, the sensible adults, if you like, in the room. And then you had the renegade brigade who were doing all the crazy stunts, and the mixture of the two. I mean, I once went and recce'd Hale Barnes ahead of one of the proposed marches there, and that ended up with me weirdly walking at the far end of, I think it was Alex Hamilton's back garden, and just stuff like there was like everyone was involved, and everybody sort of took on a role at that time to just try and ensure that two things happened. One, the club survived, and two, these guys went. And then I was getting calls from Lindsay and other people who were involved in that, and they were the proper frontline guys there who were risking it all, and we had the big pink taxi and all that kind of stuff. And those people who did that, they did really brave things in terms of the risks they took to make sure that they did everything they could to keep the club alive. So as much as it was terrible in terms of what was happening on the pitch, and the fact you could see the club being, the life was being drained out of it before your eyes, and you knew that when Lee Trundle and Andy Morrell left at the end of the promotion season, both on Bosmans, that nobody would have made any effort to keep them at the football club because it wasn't in their interest for the club to do well. So they both left for nothing. We brought them both out of non-league. So you could there were lots of signs the ground was beginning to fall down and all the rest of it. There were lots of signs of the attempt that they were making to kill the club. And you didn't. Well, we were doing something about it, luckily, and that something collectively proved to be successful, at least in the initial instance. But there was a great What was heartening in that period, and other clubs haven't been able to demonstrate this the same way, I don't think that Wrexham did, was that there were enough people sufficiently invested in the future of the football club to come out and really put themselves out to make sure that they kept the club alive. So all those events, like the event you mentioned, the speeches from the Guildhall balcony and stuff like that, all those events, the marches through town, the boycotts, the picketing of the leafleting of the solicitors that they were using in Manchester, people gave up loads of their time and made big efforts to make sure that the message got across. And that campaign, and the help from other fans at other clubs, Brighton in particular, but that campaign proved to be hugely successful, and it brought a lot of people together. So it proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that even in the darkest hour, there was a beating heart still in the football club, in the fan base, that was determined that this wasn't going to be the end.
Which obviously happened again, didn't it, in 2011 with the tax bill was there, raising of the funds.
Yeah, so that, you know, I guess once everyone had been galvanized once, it was more, it became more, you know, it became easier for everybody to kind of go, we'll go again, we'll go again, we'll do this thing again. If it's happening again, we'll do this thing again. But at that point, I was getting like severely kind of, at that point, I there was no fun in going to the game. That there was a battle to be won there, but the actual experience, which is all I ever wanted, the simple experience of going to watch the match, the fun had gone out of that bit because you just couldn't enjoy it with everything that was going on. Because by now, of course, we'd fallen to this new low level. So the impact had been felt directly on the football club, and that put the club back in jeopardy again, because the lower down you go, the harder it gets, no question. So we were back on, you know, on the critical list again there. It required more energy from people. It required more battling. I was getting more phone calls from people on both sides. One side trying to put their point, and clearly I was, you know, I'd been a trust member for many years at this point. So I very much had a vested interest, but I still heard, you know, from that side about what they were trying to do and why it wasn't fair and all these kinds of things. So it was all pretty stressful, frankly. It wasn't a lot of fun. But again, hats off to everybody who kind of dug in, because that's what was required, and made sure that they pushed the deal over the line to get another lot out and to basically effectively start all over again.
Yeah, and when Wrexham got relegated, did you think it would be easier to come back up?
I'm not sure I thought at all. I probably, I guess we'd make a bit of a go of it. But the problem was the background. And to have success in football, I think one of the things that you definitely need, and I think lots of clubs prove this, is you need basically stability and security behind the scenes. The stuff on the pitch, that fluctuates. But unless you've got stability behind the scenes, it's highly unlikely that you're going to get to a position where you can move on, because that chaos behind there that's going on back there impacts ultimately on what happens there on the pitch. And so I think it was that the concern I would have had that we went into non-league without that security and stability. And it proved to be the case. I mean, there was big money spent initially to try and get straight out of it, but that was a kind of a splurge that couldn't be sustained. And then we were ultimately left, and I say we, the fans, were left to pick up the pieces financially once the trust takeover had finally gone through. So I'm not sure I was incredibly confident at that stage, because of everything that was happening, that we would get out quickly. But I certainly didn't think it was going to take 15 years.
I mean, only having two promotion spots is probably didn't help either, did it?
Well, no, everybody knows that. You go in the National League and your margin for error is tiny. So the one season in there where we gave it the walloping good go under Andy Morrell, which was it was kind of the fag end of Dean Saunders' squad, and he finally, when everyone had run out of money, I thought Dean started, his acquisitions were good at the point where there was actually no more money to be spent. And I guess maybe people were having to work a bit harder to scout a bit more, and to be a bit more kind of thoughtful about the type of player that was brought in, because it was, every decision was important, because you couldn't make as many decisions on that basis. So Andy inherited a good squad, but then added to it well. And then you had the kind of the impetus of the fans' involvement now. And suddenly the corner appeared to be turned. We had the fantastic season with all the points earned. And then any other season we'd have got promoted with that, obviously. But I guess it was indicative of the luck we had at that point, is that there was the club that was spending more at that stage than anybody had ever spent in the National League before, in Fleetwood, who pipped us to the title. And then there was an inevitability about losing the playoffs. I mean, that kind of just, that was, it was like night follows day, frankly. And then it became harder, because the loss of impetus in the aftermath of that, and the impact that losing a playoff final tends to have on teams, was much harder to bear when the budget was tight. And at the point at which the fans were running the club, and there were sensible financial decisions being made. Well, actually, National League is not really the place for sensible financial decisions. How did we get out of there eventually? We got out of there eventually by spending a load of money. Basically, fundamentally spending more than anybody else. Because there's two ways to get out of the National League. One is to build a team that is coached into a position where it does really, really well, but there's only one automatic promotion place. And so the other way to go about it is to spend more than everybody else and make sure that you've got more better players than everybody else. Well, we tried plan A, didn't work for us. Very difficult to do plan A, because how do you keep a group of players who are good together for more than one season at that league? Everyone just goes. So that's really, really difficult to do. And plan B is the other one, which eventually worked.
You mentioned Dean Saunders there. Wrexham have always seemed to attract some decent name managers. Bryn Law, even when times were hard. Mike Newell was at the club for a while. These are relatively big names in terms of football. What's been the attraction with Wrexham?
Well, I guess people would recognise it. I'm sure they do now, but I always did anyway. As a football place, a place where the football club has remained very sort of important. Even when I was going in the kind of in the 80s, when the club was really on its uppers in the Football League, but in a worse mess, even arguably, than we were in the National League financially, with players driving themselves to away games and that kind of thing. Then even then, you would go back in the pub and you'd get lambasted for having been to watch Wrexham, but people were still asking you questions about it. The club hadn't, although the crowds had dipped to almost nothing, the club hadn't yet been forgotten. And every now and again, the interest levels would suddenly peak off the back of a big cup tie, or a good away day, or whatever it might be, a European game. And they would all come back in, and you suddenly realise, God, where did all these people come from? They're still here. They're still interested, they're still invested. And so it took a concerted period of success ultimately to bring those people back again. So the first couple of home games that I saw at the racecourse in 1979, well, the first one was Blackburn, 10,000, but the next couple were Sunderland and Stoke, where the gate was around about 20,000. And I think I'm right in saying those are still the biggest league crowds since I've been watching the club. And so I came in at 20,000, and then found myself sub 1,000 in the Football League on one particular occasion. And then saw average gate bumping along around about 1,500, 1,800. And now we're back up, 13,500 crowds again. So it has been a bit of a roller coaster from that perspective. But the one thing throughout all of it, which is where I started all this ramble, was that the people are into the football club. The people are certainly into football. I mean, Wrexham is one of the most football mad places I've ever been. I mean, at the moment, it's everywhere. It always was anyway, because if we weren't supporting Wrexham, they were supporting Everton or Man City or Man United, well, it wasn't Man City much, but Liverpool, of course. there were always people going all over. I had mates who used to go and watch Chelsea. I had a mate who used to go and watch Ipswich. He lived in Rwabon, for God's sake. So people were going all over the place to watch football constantly. Absolute like mania about it. Just not enough of them were going just down the road to the racecourse anymore. So I think probably people recognise that this is a football place. And if you go, it's a place where people take the game very seriously. So maybe that helps. A little bit of reputation. The ground still carries a bit of weight because it, it's still. I still love the way it looks, and it hasn't changed a great deal since that first game in '79. In fact, my seat is probably still in the border stand. Is it still called the border stand? I don't know. So that. I guess that if people are attracted to the football club, I would hope it's on the basis of the fact that they recognise that there's a passion here that you don't get everywhere, not at clubs that have traditionally operated at this level anyway.
And speaking about managers, Phil Parkinson, I think has been probably the most important individual in football in sense of recent years. You talk about the players, the Mullins, but I think he's been the perfect manager, the way he's conducted himself, his experience. What do you like about Phil Parkinson?
I like everything about Phil Parkinson. I've known Phil quite a long time because when I was working for Sky Sports, Phil was in charge at Bradford City, and they had that brilliant run to the League Cup final, and I was with them along a lot of the way then because Sky was doing a lot of coverage of them. So I got to know Phil through that connection. He was really helpful, Phil. He was good to work with, and so I enjoyed his company there. And then he went on to other clubs, but I encountered him again when he was at Hull fairly briefly. And then I had a really good day. I went to cover a game when he was at Bolton, and it was the last game of the season, and it was Bolton v Nottingham Forest, and Bolton had to win to stay up, depending on other results. And so I was there for Soccer Sunday, as it was, final day, to cover that match. And I was in the media room before the game at Bolton, and the team sheet came in, and Phil had picked Aaron Wilbraham to play in the starting 11. And I don't think Wilbraham had started a game all season. If he had, it was very, very few. And obviously, Aaron was probably in his mid-30s at that point. So it was a name I knew. I'd seen him play for other clubs. But he'd been thrown in the starting 11 for this crucial game against Nottingham Forest. And the reaction in the media room was really telling, because there was a lot of tut-tutting when the team sheet came in, and people were going, Wilbraham, what's he done there? Why has he done that? I don't understand that. I think somebody said something like, oh, he's signed his own death warrant there, meaning, the manager made the last poor decision kind of thing. So there was an awful lot of negativity in the room, which I didn't know the story at Bolton. I knew where they were in the table, but I didn't know any of the background stuff. So I could sense the negativity. Anyway, to cut a long story short, with a whatever it was, 89th minute goal or a 90th minute goal scored by, guess who? Aaron Wilbraham. Bolton Wanderers stayed up right in the very few seconds of the season. And then there was like a massive pitch invasion, huge celebrations. I interviewed Phil on the pitch in the midst of these huge celebrations. And I thought after that one, who got that one right? Who got that one right? Phil Parkinson got that one absolutely right. And he'd worked through all sorts of problems at Bolton. And yet on the final day, he'd made a big call, and it was the right call. And that guy had got the crucial goal. And so that was another good, lesson in terms of his ability to coax things out of players, right time, right decision, and it worked out for them. And then, so when he popped up at Wrexham, I was really happy because I knew him as an individual relatively well, and I just put him down in good guy category, right? And that's a good start for me. I knew his coaching staff, Steve Parkin, I've known for years. He's a great guy, a different character to Phil, but he's brilliant. And so I think Lee Butler was in at the outset as well. I knew Lee Butler because they used to say that me and Lee Butler looked like each other and that we were twins whenever I popped up at Doncaster where he was working for a long time. So we always used to have a laugh together. So I knew Lee as well. Good, straight, solid guy. So I liked that management team. I knew them all, and I thought this is a good group of guys who in the situation we're in could do us a good job. And the key with Phil has been right from the start the things that I thought about him have proved, I think, to be crucial to the success here. Is that he has been absolutely rock solid, good guy, and his hardest job is, I think, is keeping everybody at that football club, the players in particular, focused on football. Because it is the easiest thing in the world. We've seen that the new advert that's been been released. You see things like that now at other clubs. If I see that at other clubs, I get a little bit worried, because I'm thinking, I don't know, are they focused here? And then Phil Parkinson pops up in that one, doesn't he? But he doesn't do much. He just kind of
right at the end,
he kind of grimaces in a way to say, what is this ridiculousness? But that actually sums it. That's probably, in a way, he embraces it, but on his terms. So he appears in stuff, cameras in the dressing room and all that. He's done that bit because he recognizes the value to the football club, but at the same time, it's madness. And he's managed to keep the group fully focused on football in the midst of them getting movie offers and writing books and, releasing clotheslines and all these other things, that the spin-offs for these guys now that they've been able to enjoy, which is great. But what he's been able to do in the midst of all that is keep the group together and keep the group focused on the number one task, which is playing football. And I think that's arguably his greatest achievement, because when the day comes when it isn't Phil Parkinson anymore, that aspect of it could be the hardest aspect to replicate, because you're going to have to get a manager in there who accepts the terms by which they get this job in terms of the way that the club operates. And not every manager will be kind of able potentially to do that, because other managers, guys I know, have found it really difficult with the whole access all areas kind of concept with cameras everywhere. They've found that difficult to handle. So in some instances, they've just said, I'm not taking part in it, and they kind of disappear from it. Whereas Phil hasn't done that. He's in it, and he does what he needs to do when he needs to do it. He's let the players get on with it and be involved in it, but he's kept everything very tightly controlled. At least that's how it looks from the outside anyway.
Is there a danger of more clubs now trying to replicate what Wrexham have done, thinking it's guaranteed success? These documentaries are happening for years, but I think this is the one that's really, really caught on and really seen a success that's brought a club along.
Well, that's and when I said about the sports marketing bit, that's the bit. If I was a proper academic rather than pretending to be an academic, I'd be out there trying to do the research on this, because I would want to know what the formula was for the success in this instance. Like you rightly say, this is not the first. They used to go and Fly on the Wall documentary series about a football club. I remember them going way back.
Sunderland.
Well, yeah, Sunderland were involved. Twice Sunderland have been involved. So way before Peter Reid was in charge. Leyton Orient's was a famous one on Channel 4, and I'd use it. There's a famous clip from that, the rant in the dressing room with the manager, John Sitton. I've used that clip in coach education sessions many times. So that was allow cameras in, access all areas, unvarnished kind of footage of what happens behind the scenes. So there have been lots previously. But this one was different. Clearly, this one was different. I think the difference, as I've identified it here, is that it doesn't just make itself a story about a football team and the football team's results. That is an element. It's an important element, but it's not the only element. And I think the thing that's been most successful in this instance, as far as I can ascertain, and I've kind of asked American fans about this, why? What is it? What's got you hooked here? And I'm told that it's the story about the club, so not the results just, but the story around the club. But it's also really important, the community element to this as well. And it's the stories that have been told about people in the community that have been really successful in terms of hooking people in. And I spoke to a couple of the young couple in America after the game in Santa Clara over a beer outside of a bar, and asked them, how did you get into this? And they said, well, we recognize the place. We feel like we grew up somewhere similar. And it's that connection that they have with the community that's as important as anything else. So that's the bit that if I was trying to point other people in the direction of trying to repeat the magic formula, it would be to build it around the people, rather than build it around the football. And I think that's the bit that's worked in this instance incredibly well. And that's the challenge for the people making the programs. And I'm in touch with the people making the programs. I try and help them out. The challenge is to keep telling good stories here. The football stuff, at some point, it could be this season, next season, whenever. The football stuff won't always be, every season finishes with glory. It can't possibly be that, because that isn't football. It's not real. But you can hopefully still keep telling good stories, which will keep people engaged with the whole thing. It will be a challenge that the longer it goes on, but I still think there's lots more to be said about the whole thing. You can watch things develop now.
Obviously, in the modern age of social media, players are exposed to a lot of scrutiny, their comments, their opinions. How do you coach people on this aspect of the game? I know James McLean, for example, very opinionated, stands his ground. Some people are not so open, but how do you find that fine line of being open to fans, showing people who you are, but crossing the line and getting into trouble? Is there a fine line there?
It can be a fine line. It can be a very broad line sometimes. I mean, I used James Shrewsbury post as an example in the coach education session I did last night for a load of international coaches, because what we're talking about is using your social media in a way that, as a coach, enhances your career, not hinders your career. So my advice to them is to be mindful of what they put out there, on the basis that they are in a kind of what is regarded as a position of responsibility, because you're dealing with young people as a coach, but also that requires a degree of maturity as well. So the things that you would say as a footballer, perhaps, outbursts when you're reacting to stuff that people have said to you, you can't necessarily say when you're a coach. So you make a transition, you make a decision to change. James would find it much harder to post stuff like that as a manager, because he's seen as being the one in charge. And so that sort of brings with it an extra set of responsibilities, frankly, which is why, although a few dabbled with it, you now see almost no managers involved with social media. A few years ago, when we started talking about in coach education, I would have encouraged it at that point, because it did look like a good place that you can go and dialogue with the fans. But unfortunately, too many people's dialogue has been of a nature that doesn't carry us forward, is abusive, insulting, whatever it might be. And so that the coaches, the managers, have just basically, and I don't blame them, have just opted out. So that connection, the potential for a connection there, has been lost in most instances now. Players probably still more likely to get involved with things because they feel they should be, because they're young people, and all young people are interacting with social media, so they feel they should be doing the same as all their peers are doing. But it is increasingly difficult. That's why a lot of people have opted out of X, for instance, Twitter, and headed over to Blue Sky, because the atmosphere there currently as a social media platform is a lot more friendly, gentle, whatever. You can make a comment there without being, without suddenly people coming from all over with kind of crazy takes on this. And I've been in that position on social media myself, with somebody with a bit of a platform or a profile, and it gets to the point where you go, I'm just not going to bother anymore, because I can't do with the kind of the abuse, the tirade coming in my direction. If I say something vaguely controversial, I will then pay the price, and every facet of my past as a journalist, and every aspect of my performance as one now, will be kind of hauled over and analysed and thrown at me and all the rest of it. So it just gets such a kind of negative experience, so you just stop doing it. So the interaction for players is difficult, and I still don't think young people in this country get anything like enough kind of guidance, training, education from a very early age, and using social media, so that they are liable to make mistakes, because they don't realise the impact of putting stuff out in the public domain. I got taught as a young journalist how important words were, and being given a platform to share words was crucial, because you could end up in prison if you got it wrong. And that's still the case. Nothing's changed, but people don't know this. So they make the mistakes, and young footballers have paid the price for making those mistakes. And when I do the coach ed sessions, I go back through people's social media, the coaches, and see what's back there. So not recent stuff necessarily, but go and look 5 years ago, because remember, this stuff doesn't disappear, it stays. So go back through the archive and see what they were saying 5 years ago, because unfortunately the reality is that stuff can get dredged up at the moment when they least want it to happen. You know, they get a moment of great glory, get appointed to a job, and suddenly that tweet from 2017 resurfaces, and then everything changes. So they have to be very aware that there's a job to be done in. I mean, I'd say don't do it in the first place, but if it's out there, they need to go back and be aware that it needs to be gone. So that tidying up what I call your archive is an important part potentially now of that, taking on the role of being a coach.
Yes, I think people do go searching for material they can use against people who they disagree with. And it's a shame, because social media is an opportunity to engage with famous people, sports stars, people you might admire or disagree with, but you've got to do it in a way that's sensible. You have an opportunity to engage, but people feel that they're safe enough to be abusive, or they're so passionate or angry, they can't really contain themselves.
Well, it's very easy to be angry and abusive towards somebody when they've no idea who you are. You know, if there's no face or name there, then if you're hiding behind the shield of anonymity, then you feel that the right or the ability to say what you like to who you like, because you just don't think there's going to be any comeback from it. And that is, for me, that is a problem. You know, that allowing people to be, I understand why people have been allowed to be anonymous, but it comes at a very high price for those who aren't anonymous. You know, so those who are known don't have that place of sanctuary to go where they can hide away from everybody and say what they like in retaliation, perhaps, because people know who they are. So that hasn't helped. There's a piece I read recently that footballers are beginning to move towards LinkedIn as a platform now, and the reason being quite straightforward, is that they just don't get the same level of abuse when they post on there, because everybody on LinkedIn posts with a name. You see who they appear to be. At least you see a name and you see an image of somebody and you assume that's them, but there isn't just a sort of set of numbers or a pseudonym or whatever. There is an identity to the person who's responding, and that has to make people think harder about what they're saying. Because I mean, the key to all of this is the things even people have said to me on social media, I'm pretty damn certain they wouldn't say it to my face, right?
No. Very few would at all.
Well, and if they did say it to my face, then well, let's see what happens next, kind of thing. But in most cases, you're almost. I've probably met people who may well have abused me on social media and had a perfectly reasonable conversation without knowing that it was them who did it. So I think that makes a difference, and it's made life a bit more complicated, to say the very least, for everybody, because people feel they should be embracing it. I use social media as a promotional tool, frankly. If I'm selling a brand, I'm the brand kind of thing here. Even more important when you freelance. So you can use it very successfully to connect with people. You and I connected via social media here, right? So there's a good interaction takes place there. That's great. At its best, it's been a wonderful tool. At its worst, it could end up in the destruction of mankind.
I just want to go back to the managers' interviews. Do managers have a responsibility to come out and explain themselves? How do you deal with a manager that's upset or being awkward? I know there's a few famous cases, but how do you deal with a difficult manager?
Well, I've dealt with a few difficult managers down the years, that's for certain. I mean, basically, I just try and be normal, if you like, and just ask the question I think needs to be asked. But if you learn something down the years, and sometimes it's through harsh lessons, it's the way to frame a question which gives the manager a sense that you understand the problems he's suffering here, but you need to examine why they might be taking place. So you know, I'm coming at it from a sympathetic perspective, generally speaking, because I don't have an axe to grind, do I? I'm just there. As I was saying to my group of coaches last night, you know, the phrase media refers to the bit in the middle. So the person, me, the reporter, I'm there to do my job, and my job is to ask a question. The answer isn't for me. You know, 9.5 times out of 10, I'm not really bothered what the answer is, because I've got a job to do, which is to ask a question. I ask the question. You answer as a coach through me, because you're talking to the people. You can't even see me in the interview. You're talking to the people who are watching or listening to the interview, not to me. So the questions are not personal questions. The questions are the ones that I think all those people would want to hear asked, generally speaking. So managers, when they personalize and have a go at the reporter, really dislike that because of what I've just said. Because it's not about the person in front of you. It's about, and occasionally, sometimes, it's not very often, but occasionally a question might be really kind of, you know, you listen to it, you go, oh, ouch, that's not a great one. Because remember, post-match, usually when this stuff happens, when the adrenaline's pumping, their team's just been thumped by somebody. They've just had, you know, imagine you're Frank Lampard doing the post-match after you've had 2,500 or whatever it was, Leeds fans singing about you for the last 15 minutes of the game in midweek. And you stand there and you absorb it all, and then you have to go out and kind of form intelligent sentences and speak to the media. Not always easy, in fairness, I understand that. But there's no reason to have a go at the person, generally speaking, the person in front of you, because they are only asking questions on somebody else's behalf. So in that instance, I have had issues in the past. Some kind of managers who are notoriously difficult to interview. And then others who you know is going to be fine. No matter how pressurized the circumstances, you know it's going to be all right, because they will just deal with you in a straight-handed, even-handed manner. And then, so those guys, you enjoy going to interview because you're not going to get a hard time. The ones who are going to give you a hard time, then you go there with a bit more trepidation, and you're probably working that little bit harder to make sure you get the words right and the tone right as well. So, yeah, I mean, it's something you learn. I think it's something you learn over time. It's difficult for young reporters. If you get thrust straight into that kind of tunnel situation, the post-match interviews, I mean, that's a real baptism of fire in there, because that's the sort of that's where it all happens, in that tunnel, and that's the holy of holies, being in the tunnel post-match. And so you need to know how it all works down there, because you've got to kind of just fit in. You're not the main thing in there at all. You're just you're almost like a piece of the furniture. You're the place that they go to do the interview bit that they have to do pre and post match, but you're not a part of anything there. You're a sideline to it all. So you need to know your position in the midst of all that stuff. Sometimes that reporters can get that a bit wrong when they're in the midst of all that, but I try and educate coaches to just be nice, because I don't think you can put high enough price on that. And long term, for most coaches, the ones who haven't built up a sparkling CV, the best way to get another job is to be nice to people, really, in this job. You know, to talk well and be nice to people, because people are going to be inclined to give you another go at it next, because, well, he looks like a good guy, she looks like a good person. So that would be a sort of, you know, basic advice, would be to remember that it's a job that brings a whole load of pressure with it, but ultimately we're all trying to get along, right? I've got a job to do, coach has got a job to do, and if we agree that we kind of meet in the middle on that basis, we should be all right. There are a few managers around who don't make that agreement, and so that's when things get a little trickier.
Are some managers, do we say, like Fergie and Mourinho, are they too big? Can they get away with it? Well, I think with Mourinho, it became stale eventually. It was a breath of fresh air to begin with.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I used to use his examples of his work repeatedly in Coach Ed, and I'd say, you know, I'd speak glowingly about the stuff he did. I thought his sense of humor was brilliant, because remember, he was speaking in his second or third language, but the way he created humorous scenarios was like fantastic, and he would distract attention. He was a master at distracting attention. Something bad over there, but you look over here, and he would do that very, very well. But then I don't know what happened, because I don't think the Mourinho you saw later on, the angry Mourinho, I don't think that's him. I don't get a sense that's really him. But something kind of seemed to irritate him. I mean, they do an awful lot of media work, but then Jose couldn't argue because he was doing adverts and stuff at the same time. So if you embrace it like that and you use it because, watch company or whatever it was is paying you a wagon load of cash to do stuff, you can't really say, I like this type of media, but I don't like this kind of media. You've got to embrace it all, frankly. Sir Alex Ferguson was terrifying, and he's the one. He's on my list of probably top 3 most difficult people to deal with, and it was just the thought of going to interview him that was enough to terrify the likes of me. You'd go there with kind of, you'd almost think, I really need Manchester United to win this game, because I did that. They lost an FA Cup tie at Southend a League Cup tie at Southend when I was covering that game live. So that was oh God, here we go. But actually, he was all right after that, because I think because he didn't want to be seen to be kind of churlish because Southend had won, and he understood the significance of that for Southend. So he was all right after that. But then 1 or 2 other occasions weren't quite so straightforward. So yeah, he was. But that was the clever thing that he did, was to basically instill such a level of terror in everybody who dealt with him that you would run clear of asking the difficult question. And he had kind of a bit of a protective circle around him as well, in terms of the people on the staff at Manchester United who would step in before you got to Sir Alex to talk to him, to kind of check what it was that you were planning on talking about, and would gently dissuade you on occasions. It happened to me on one significant occasion, would gently dissuade you from that line of questioning, reminding you that Sir Alex probably won't want to talk about that, So it was a bit like a kind of a meeting a royal at times with Sir Alex. But so that was a great tactic on his part, because he just scared the bejesus out of everybody, frankly. So yeah, I mean, I think you have to earn the right to be a bit of a I'll say the word bastard in those situations, because if you've got a CV and you've won loads of stuff, then you shouldn't do it, but you probably get away with doing it. Where you're not allowed to do that is if you've kind of effectively won nothing, right? If you are at a stage of your management career where you're trying to establish a reputation, you can't go down that route then. You can't be the hard guy, the tough guy, the nasty bloke, because you just not earned the right. At that stage, you need everybody else more than they need you, frankly. So you need to be mindful of where you're at and how you got there.
And Fergie had that famous case, didn't he, where he boycotted the BBC for many, many years. What were your thoughts on that? That was him using his power. What he had. Do managers have obligations, written contracts to speak to the media? Is that part of the broadcasting deal?
It is, yeah. It is in the Premier League anyway. So, I mean, ultimately, he ended up costing Manchester United an awful lot of money, because they were getting fined every time he didn't show up. But then ultimately, somebody must have had a word with him, because then he started doing it all again. But they changed the contract, and I was working on, there was a new Sky deal came in, and part of that contract was to every game was being covered as if it were a live game. So it went from being the live games covered as if they were being a live game. That meant like having a touchline reporter, which was the job I used to do a lot, and having a crew on site for every game. And then one season they introduced it where every game would have that. And that meant that every game was being produced like a live game, not by Sky, although it was Sky staff, but by Premier League itself, because it was what they were selling to the countries overseas. So all the countries who had rights deals with the Premier League were told, right, as part of your deal, you're going to get a pre-match interview with the player, you're going to get a pre-match interview with the manager, you're going to get post-match interview with player from either side, post-match interview with the manager from either side. And that's guaranteed, and that was written into the contract. And so they then said to the clubs, right, this is the contract, you've got to provide these people at this time. There's a stipulated time for it all as well, so there's a running order. And if you don't hit the marks in terms of getting people there on time, or get the right people there. So it had to be a player from the starting 11. Initially, it was from the squad, and then it was from the starting 11. And there's a person on site with every Premier League game, a match manager who literally has kind of on an iPad as a tick list, and they go through checking that the timings are all right and that the people who arrive at the interview position are the right people. So they're from the starting 11. The manager's got to be there within certain time frame around the team sheet being put in, official team sheet. So the whole thing is very strictly choreographed, and if you step outside of those boundary lines, the club it'll be in the report, and then the club will be fined, or could be fined. And the sums are significant. You're talking quite big money here. So there's a great incentive for the clubs, and it's worked, to be honest with you, because Arsene Wenger, just before they introduced it, Arsene Wenger, for instance, who could be good on his day, but could also be very awkward on his day as well. He said, "I'm not doing this. I'm not doing pre-match interviews before every single game. I'm opting out." But he didn't. Somebody must have said, we can't afford for you to opt out of this. It's a contractual obligation to do all this stuff. EFL, I'm not quite sure the rules are in the EFL. For a live game, you've got to do all that, but it's not a stipulation for every game. I mean, we do it at Leeds United as part of our LUTV coverage. We do a player interview. We don't do the manager before the game, but we do a player in the tunnel before the game, or at the side of the pitch before every game. So that's just part of building up the coverage, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was going to say, broadcasters are paying for the package of a product, and that is part of the product. If you like, it's not the right word to say, perhaps, but people are paying for a product. Broadcasters,
absolutely, and the key for, if you sell your product overseas, you have an obligation to make sure that you give those people something in return for their investment in your product. So what the Premier League was doing was saying, we're giving you something extra now. You pay more money for the Premier League now, but we're giving you more. And there was much talk, I don't know what's happened with it, there was much talk of them introducing halftime interviews, and I thought it was going to be this season, but it doesn't seem to have appeared yet. But that would be a part of the same thing, to give, rights holders a bit more. So we're saying we're giving you more access now. So you need the buy-in from the coach. This is why coach education and things become ever more important, because the more you're put on that pedestal, before these big events, the games, the more you need to be kind of on the mark in terms of getting the message right. Because this stuff is going out to really big audiences around the world, so you're only getting one go at it. So it is something that people are paying for, and it's important that timings and things are correct, because they are selling the product overseas, and when you buy the product, you need to know that the thing that you're told is going to happen at this time. So as a producer of TV coverage, no matter what country you're in, you put times in your running order, so all the way through from half an hour before kickoff to kickoff, and you need to know that at 15 minutes before kickoff, the manager will arrive to do his pre-match interview, so you can schedule that in that little window there. You'll have a player right at the start of the show. If it's half an hour before, that will already be done. So you need to know these things are going to be where they are when they're meant to be there. And after the match, the managers have to be in, I think it's a 35-minute window that they've got to do their post-match within. But usually it's much, much quicker than that, because there's a guy in the tunnel to go and kind of get them out the dressing room to make sure they come and do the interviews. But that's for the same reason, because everybody needs to know, if you're doing live coverage of the game, whether it's a Sky game or not, you need to know that the manager at the end of the game is definitely going to come and do an interview in the time that you're still broadcasting. So they have to get into the live show, wherever that may be. So they do like a global interview, which is available to everybody around the world, and then sometimes overseas broadcasters send their own people over to do stuff as well. And then there's like a queuing system with it. So that's why these things happen. And as EFL coverage gets bigger and more of a global product, which is already happening, see it at Wrexham, see it at Leeds United, then at some point you'll start, you might start initiating the same sort of structure around the way that the EFL games are done as well, so that they all, eventually, in the not too distant future, every single game is going to be live.
I was going to ask that. That was my next question.
Yeah. I mean, there's an inevitability about that.
Yeah.
one of the big blockers at the moment is the Saturday. I've been talking about this with my students this afternoon. Is the Saturday 3 p.m. blackout? But that makes so little sense to me now that it just. I don't think it's going to survive. I don't know. There are speculation that it won't survive next season because there's a big new Premier League deal coming in next season, and as a consequence of that, pretty much as I understand it, pretty much every Premier League game will be shown live. So if you've got 3 or 4 games still stuck in that 3 till 5 slot on a Saturday afternoon, then theoretically they can't be shown live currently. So that would then mean that you're not showing every game live. So you've either got the choice of moving them out to that slot or saying we don't think this works anymore. And if somebody says that, then I think actually you'll find there's a whole chorus of approval of clubs at all levels. It was meant to protect clubs lower down, but all it's doing now, as far as I can see, is hindering clubs lower down. Wrexham would be a great example. You've got a distant away game. You've sold the 1,500 tickets that you've had offered to the club for that distant away game. It's a Saturday afternoon. There's probably 9,000 people who would like to sit down and watch the game, the live coverage of the game that afternoon. But they can't because it can't be shown. So who's losing out there? The tickets, there is no evidence that shows, and the argument against this is that people stop going to watch lower league football if the Premier League's on. But I haven't seen any evidence yet that says to me that's what happens. And if I'm a Mansfield Town fan and Manchester United on the telly, am I really staying at home to watch Manchester United when Mansfield are playing, or am I going to go and watch Mansfield? And a guy student that I worked with a couple of years ago actually did a survey in the National League of fans before they introduced, after lockdown, but before they introduced the new streaming channel. And his research was into whether fans would watch the football if there was a National League streaming channel. And the responses he got overwhelmingly said that people would still go to the game if they could go to the game. And so off the back of that, he was the only person with any research on this that I've seen. And we'd kind of worked on it together. But off the back of that, we saw the announcement of the National League streaming channel all of a sudden. Now they've handed it over to DAZN again since, but it's if you can see this thing now. We all know that on a Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock, people are watching it in the UK anyway in great numbers, and they're doing it by Fire Stick or they're doing it by VPN or whatever it may be, but they're accessing that coverage anyway. So if people are doing it anyway, we are kidding ourselves if we think it's not available. So at this point, I just say, right, you can show everything. The question then is who gets the right to show everything. That's a discussion for further down the line. But
Sky's still the powerhouse in broadcasting. Is it still the powerhouse in British sports broadcasting? Or because various competitors trying to take them on.
And most have fallen by the wayside. TNT and Sky now effectively really work together, whereas they very much, when I was working there at the height of the kind of battle between the two, and it was, you were doing stuff to make sure that they didn't have it and all the rest of it. It was quite bitter at times, but I think they now realise that it works better for them financially to work together rather than against each other, because it was pushing the price up and up and up, which was great for the Premier League, but not so great for the broadcasters. So they're still both powerful. Sky are the more powerful of the two. TNT have retreated in certain aspects, perhaps. But there's a big change coming. How long the Sky model remains the model, so you subscribe to Sky pay football, and then they pay to put football on the telly. How much longer they can resist when the pull is coming from streaming platforms, or the pull is coming from the clubs themselves saying, actually, we want to do this, or even the league. So the Premier League coming in saying, actually, we're going to do this. We'll produce the match coverage and we'll sell the match coverage on behalf of the clubs. And then we'll create a Premier League channel. How much longer that doesn't happen for, it'll be very interesting to see. I had a theory it was going to have happened by now. Maybe COVID had an impact on that because the clubs needed to boost revenue streams again, and they wanted the guarantee and the certainty of a TV deal, external broadcaster taking all the responsibility and guaranteeing the money. If you go streaming, you're not necessarily guaranteed your return. Your return could be way in excess if you're Manchester United. but it might be lower than you're currently getting if you're Bournemouth. So there's a few things to sort out on that basis, but the only thing that I would predict with a degree of certainty is that every game will be available for everybody to watch soon. And when I say every game, I'm talking soon every game. I mean, I don't just mean Premier League, I mean all the way through the leagues and into non-league. You know, I'm talking with a non-league club at the moment who want to live stream their games overseas because they see an opportunity to get into new markets. Well, they asked me, is it possible? And the answer is absolutely yes. The technology is available. The technology is cheap. It's accessible to everybody now. And, you know, I work with a company who provide a platform, Solid Sport, give you free access to a platform. So you can put your sport on there and it doesn't cost you anything. You charge a subscription. If 5 people watch paying £5 a head, that's 25 quid you didn't make last week. So, you know, once people start to examine the opportunities that their own control over pushing the product, I think they call it DTC, direct to customer. Once they see the possibilities that opens up, I just don't see how anything other than loads more coverage is the outcome.
When did you leave Sky? Would you go back? Is there opportunities to go back, or
I don't think there'll be an opportunity to go back. I wouldn't anticipate that. I don't know. I don't think I wouldn't. I wouldn't go back. I mean, you know, I enjoyed. Some of it was hard. I had a big discussion about this with a student this afternoon as well. Some of it was hard. It's a hard place to work because it's very, very demanding, and you have to give your sort of life and soul to get by there. Some of it I loved. Some of the best experience I had. The best time I had at Sky was when I was working not necessarily for Sky Sports News, but I left Sky Sports News and then worked for the football department at Sky. And that was the best time I had at Sky because I was doing 100% what I wanted to do, which was talk about football without the other stuff, you know, the chief executives, the football industry stuff that's very big on Sky Sports News, or the other sports stuff, which, you know, big confession time, not really interested in. So I was invested in doing the thing I love doing, going to do interviews with people, working on football matches, all those. That's what I wanted to do right from arriving at Sky. Did some commentary there as well. That didn't last as long as I wanted it to last. So you know, things changed. Sky have changed the way it presents itself. So there was a switch around. Lots of people left round about the time I left, and you know they created a new image, a new vision for the way that the product looked on screen. Okay, that's fair enough. So I've gone off and found other things since, and actually what I do prefer now is the control by and large that I have over the stuff I do now, and there's good variety in it. I've got the university stuff, which I do is a nice kind of steady foundation bedrock for it all financially, and then I got the other stuff. The Leeds stuff is great, doing all the commentaries with them, and then you've
covered Leeds for a while, haven't you? A lot longer than I first
yes,
started.
I've done 6 years. I mean, ever since I left Sky, from that I left in March, and I did my first Leeds game in July or August the following. So I stepped straight into the second Bielsa season, saw Leeds get promoted, but that was a mad old season because it was the lockdown season. And there was a point there where we didn't know whether it was going to finish or not. And I was a freelance by now, relying on this Leeds United gig, by and large, for my income at that stage. And I was a year into being freelance, and then everything stopped. And I had 2 months or 3 months where I earned barely a penny. So that was all pretty terrifying. But yeah, so that Leeds thing I think I've missed 4 games in 6 years or something like that now. It's very few. So that's been a kind of the continuity there I enjoyed, with a kind of good rapport with the Leeds United fans, because I did that back in the 1990s. I was the Leeds United commentator for the BBC. So I had 6 years. 6 years of doing that. That's it. Yeah, so that's it. So I had 6 years at the beginning of my career, if you like, and I've come back full circle at the end of it. I was working with BBC then, and I'm working for the football club now, but I'm still commentating on Leeds United. And those days I used to commentate on Tony DeRigo, and now I commentate with Tony DeRigo.
And they're doing well, aren't they? It looks like they're going to get promoted again, which would be a shame because it'd be nice to see Leeds and Wrexham in the Championship.
Well, it's never happened, has it? That
No,
the
I
Leeds
actually,
Wrexham fixture has never happened.
yeah, I checked that today for this interview. I'll take a look. I think it was a friendly in '64.
Well, it was back-to-back friendlies, yeah. So they played each other, I don't know, twice in 2 days or something. But and it was an early appearance for some of the guys who went on to be the very famous, very successful Revy boys. So those are the only two meetings, but never a competitive meeting
That is
between the
surprising
two.
to me.
Well,
I
it's
was
incredible.
expecting
And
a few games over the years.
I think it's the only one because I thought big pal of mine is Adrian Childs, obviously a huge West Brom fan. I thought for a long time I thought we hadn't played them, and I discovered fairly recently we played them in FA Cup third round tie in 1930s or 50s or whatever it was. Actually beat
What's the
them.
score? Okay.
Well, we won. I can't. I 3-2 or something, but Wrexham won. So
that's enough of bragging rights, yeah.
well, I gave him loads about that, obviously, because we'd been together to watch a pre-season friendly in the past at the racecourse, because we thought it was the only time. So we both went to that game, and he sat with me in the main stand, and I think Wrexham won that one as well. So we proud record against West Brom. But as far as I'm aware of the teams that have been around a long time, I think Leeds is the only one that there's no competitive fixture against. So people may dive on this and correct me, but I think that's right. And so it's incredible, really, that it's never happened. But now I almost don't want it to happen. I don't want to envisage it happening because for that to happen now, something has to go wrong.
Yes.
You know, so it's not going to be Leeds getting relegated this year. I'm pretty clear on that one. So I don't mind if it doesn't happen yet. I'm more than happy for it not to happen anyway. Not for the time being, anyway.
Yeah, I understand why they do these trips to America, but it'd be nice to get some of these big clubs at the racecourse again, have some friendlies with these big Premier League clubs.
Yeah, but I don't think it works like that anymore.
Obviously.
I don't think it works like that anymore. I mean, people's schedule, you have to fit in. If you're going to do an America trip, it's got to be when other teams are out in America. So your schedule works in tandem with other club schedules. You have booking agents who sort all this stuff out, and the big clubs aren't going to play the likes of Wrexham in pre-season friendlies anymore because they'll play a lowly club at the beginning of the pre-season program, then they'll go abroad, usually, and then they'll round off with maybe another fairly straightforward game. But it's highly unlikely you're going to get one of those big pre-season friendlies. The best way to get a game against a big club is to get promoted to the Premier League.
Yeah, and they're almost there. Almost there. What started off as perhaps a bit of a joke is starting. Well, we see a reality. Ipswich were in League One 2 years ago. We know what Luton have done. It's not impossible. Do you think promotion will happen this year?
Geez, I don't think we'll get promoted automatically. I'll say that much. And given our record in the playoffs, generally after that, then you wouldn't be wildly optimistic necessarily, although there's no reason why not, because the historical bit doesn't count for anything. The fact you've always lost in the playoffs before makes no difference to the next time you're in the playoffs. It has no bearing whatsoever, even though it would be mentioned all the time. But if we finish in third, if Wrexham finish in third place, which is possible still, very, there's a good chance of that happening, then they finish as the third best team in the division, then they should have a really good chance still of getting promoted as the third best team in the division. Obviously it's never as straightforward as that, but the good thing is that whatever happens now, and I mean almost whatever happens now, they've still had given a really good account of themselves at this higher level. And it could have been very different to this. And yet here we are in February, and the team is right in the thick of it, fighting for something very significant. If they ultimately fall short, okay, I think we all ought to be realistic. I mean, the other point I would make at this stage is that I watch a lot of Championship football, obviously, and I think there is a place that Wrexham could fit in there, but make no mistake, Leeds United are currently miles ahead of Wrexham, for instance, right? So team, I suppose it goes without saying, but they're a division above, but the gap is enormous because think of the investment there's been in that Leeds United side, and that's lost good players last summer, but there's still the level of player, the quality of the player. They look at the bench at Leeds United, and the internationals who are on the bench, and there are other teams around those top positions they're not quite as good as Leeds, I don't think, but they're strong. They've got Premier League players in them, and that's a hugely significant change. I think we've been lucky in jumping into League One when I don't think it's been particularly a strong division this year. I like the look of Stevenage. I think they played some of the best football I've seen so far this season in League One. So Birmingham are strong because they've done that thing we talked about with Wrexham in National League. If you're going to get yourself promoted, spend a lot of money and have more better players than everybody else. They've done that thing. I don't think honestly, from what I've seen, I'm not sure. I don't think they're brilliant. I think they're probably better. They are better than the rest, but I don't think they're brilliant. And I think they have a way to go in the Championship. If they were, if you were saying put them straight in the Championship now, I think they have a way to go on that basis. I think we'll see. But then below them, I think we're all largely much of a muchness, to be honest with you. So there's a race for the line on. We're off the pace still currently after our recent wobble. But finish third, if that's how it happens, then that's fantastic, because look where we've come from. It's ridiculous.
But I think expectations have changed, haven't they? You see something, so you see the investment, the squad development, and now the squad's been built up to possibly the best squad in history.
No.
I mean, I know there's been some debate here, perhaps 78, roundabout there.
Well, I arrived just off the back of that, so my timing has always been lousy. I arrived the season after the promotion, so my first games were in that first season at second division level. But there's still some great players there, by the way. But already the exodus, frankly, had begun at that stage. So that team I missed. That has to be, in terms of the way they stayed up there for the length of time they stayed up there. I mean, they missed out 1 year and then won it the next year. That's an achievement in itself. And the quality of the players there, from what I've seen of that team, I don't think across the board, I don't think we're there yet. That was a special, very special group, that. But, we're obviously, clearly, we're not far off it because of the position in the table tells you that. But I think the difference is that this team is doing it it's the first season this team's been involved at this level for that amount of time. I mean, Flinney had a great team with way less by way of resources put together. He nearly got us in the playoffs out of this division. We fell out. We were in them on the final day of the season at Southend for about 5 or 10 minutes. I was there. I was at Roots Hall. We were going mad in the away end, thinking we'd got in. And then late goal, Brentford Bristol Rovers, was it? That meant that they just dropped out again. So Flinney got us that close to getting in the playoffs at League One, which actually, frankly, in terms of what he had available, would have been probably a bigger achievement in a way than this group getting in the playoffs, because he didn't have, he'd signed brilliantly. He'd coached brilliantly. He'd created something there without being able to really invest massively in it. So we got close at that point. That's the highest level I've seen us finish at that season, other than the 3 seasons I saw in Division 2, the Championship. And then, here we are, sort of sitting currently in 3rd place, still looking to get promoted. They haven't spent all that money on Sam Smith, for instance, to not try and get promoted. There's a clear statement of intent there. And the guys in charge, I mean, I say to them, I don't know, I think it's a bit too early for us to get into the Championship. I think I see a lot of teams in there. I think we might find it really difficult in the Championship. The difference is the guys in charge go, well, let's give it a go. So I'm the
I suppose you have to see a return on Sam Smith, and Mo Farrell, who scored the other night, he was the record signing briefly.
Yeah, well,
there's a risk now of spending too much money and not getting a return.
Is it a risk? Well, I suppose there's some risk involved in it. I mean, I think the sums are still relatively manageable.
Yeah.
And frankly, we've seen other teams around. I mean, we've got nowhere near spending what Birmingham City have spent yet, and we didn't even spend as much as Huddersfield spent on Taylor, I don't think, from Luton either. So the investment's obviously, way in advance of wherever we've been at previously. But I still don't feel like they're making kind of crazy decisions. I don't have that sense, which is maybe unusual given that we've leapt up from whatever the previous record prior to this season was to where it's now some sort of 7-figure transfer fee, it would appear, for Sam Smith, plus the investment in Rodriguez as well, which is going to be significant. But I don't have a sense of kind of impending doom on that, that we've got to get there or else. It still feels kind of well managed, and it still feels sensible, even though actually it's probably pretty crazy, but it feels okay. I like it. I don't know what exciting. It is, but I like it.
Just before you go, Bamford, any truth in that rumor? Was it going to happen? Was it possible?
I have absolutely no insight on that at all, because I go to Leeds, I commentate on the game, and I go home again. That's my that's my interaction with the football club. So nobody tells me anything. But if on instinct, I don't think it was. It didn't sound right to me. I don't think that would have happened. I think there might have been some interest in Gelhardt, because. He was, the problem was Patrick got injured in the midst of any speculation that was flying around anyway. So that was the end of that, basically. And he's still injured. So, no, I didn't ever really feel that was going to happen. I kept getting asked it every time I went to Ellen Road, but I didn't ever have a sense it was going to happen.
Okay, great stuff. Thanks, Bryn. Thank you so much for this. And again, exciting times. The club flying. It's a great journey, and it's only just starting, I think. Bryn Law, thank you so much for this.
You're welcome.